Welcome to the show. This is the Magician and the Fool podcast, and we are on episode number 73. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Solomon Pakal to discuss Mesoamerican spirituality and religion, specifically that of the Maya, which is his specialty. This is a fantastic episode, kind of breaking new ground on the podcast with this particular topic. It's kind of a whole new world of spirituality and magic that many people probably don't know too much about, but it's extremely rich and deep and worthy of investigation and exploration. Solomon essentially gives us a college-level discussion here on these topics, so we are really happy how this turned out and are excited to get it out to our listeners. As always, we want to thank all of our Patreon supporters. In reality, you all make this experiment possible. If anyone else out there would like to partner with us and help keep things running, please check out our Patreon page and do what feels right to you. We dedicate this to Hermes and Asclepius. May any merits that we accumulate doing this work be distributed to all sentient beings so that they together with us may equally realize awakening. Welcome to the show. We are excited today to have guest Solomon Pakal on. He is an occultist, a brujo, a Mesoamerican polytheist, among other things. And this is going to be an interesting conversation. I think we're going to touch on some topics that maybe we haven't in the past. So welcome to the show, Solomon.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you.
Really looking forward to this one. I like the sound of your demographics that you guys are reaching to, so it allows me to kind of put down a few more restraints when it comes to talking about these topics.
Yeah, we like it unrestrained.
Awesome. Yeah, excited to see where this goes. So as we do with everyone, if you wouldn't mind, maybe a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, and really how you got into this practice and these practices.
All right. So Solomon Pakal was born in the capital of the free world, Washington, D.C. I say that because my mother comes from Guatemala, and a common goal for immigrants coming to America is that they want their kids to be American. So my mom was very proud to have me born in Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C. is such a beautiful melting pot of cultures, but also esoteric traditions. And my mother, she comes from an indigenous culture of indigenous Maya people in Guatemala, closer to the Caminaljuyu region, which is modern-day Guatemala City. But my family lineage spreads from Antigua, Zacatepecas, this entire highland Maya area that has had indigenous activity since the pre-classic era of Mesoamerican chronology. My mother still is a bruja, and her mother was a bruja. So I come from a lineage of brujas, and that tradition is a blend of Catholic concepts as well as indigenous Maya concepts. I was raised in this tradition at first with a bit of hesitancy from my mother, but I was brought into the tradition really because out of a sense of necessity. I was raised in a witch war. There was somebody who was attacking my family, and for most people growing up in that kind of culture, because of all the Catholicism, embracing brujeria and embracing magic or anything spiritual outside of Catholicism or Christianity is it's met with a lot of hesitation because of cultural reasons, like not just the whole going to hell thing, but if you're caught and you're caught without the proper context, or you don't have the right kind of reputation, your economic opportunities will suffer as well. Lack of jobs, you might get attacked, your property might get destroyed, things like that. So in Guatemala and a lot of places in Latin America, brujeria is done by a lot of common folk, but it's done in a way where you go to the river, you go to the crossroads, you go to wherever you're doing the spell, you call the spirit, you do the thing, then you turn around, you don't look back, and then come Sunday, you're in there praying to Jesus for forgiveness. Even cartels do this. Cartel leaders still like have that kind of like apologetic mentality about brujeria in Latin America. So I'll say this, that the brujeria is a pretty broad term. I know that there are authors these days like J. Allen Cross, Laura Davila, that have published books on northern Mexico. I would call it like northern Mexican ranchero brujeria, which can differ from like the kind of brujeria I'm talking about. While it is like a composite and syncretized form of esoterica, I will say that in Guatemala and in places like in southern Mexico, but as well as like at the Monterrey region, there's a lot of indigenous influence. Some you are working with old spirits from this continent, very old spirits of various varieties. Some are old gods in like weird guises, not necessarily Catholic saint guises either, just like strange folklore guises. And my mother comes from that bloodline. This is different from other modern day indigenous esoteric traditions. So brujeria is a type of tradition that changes kind of on a spectrum the further south you go of the border. But then you have something called curanderismo. And curanderismo prioritizes itself as a healing art. Does it have some kind of like spell casting capabilities? It does, but that's not the priority. Curanderismo is also a syncretized art form, but it is all of its herbal remedies are basically indigenous because curanderismo was taking place here. So it didn't matter if you were an apologetic Catholic Indio that would have to like call St. Michael the Archangel instead of like an indigenous identity just to get some kind of approval, to turn away some eyes. The plants you were using were indigenous more often than not. There are some books on like colonial era curanderismo in the Yucatan Peninsula that actually have like remedies that still survive to this day. But curanderismo, it is a composite art, and it over time, people don't often know this, but like the southern Mexico is a tropical paradise, and it became international over the years. So things like even Hindu chakras, Catholic saints, West African traditions were melded into curanderismo. So a lot of the energy bodies and energy systems that they use in curanderismo are actually Vedic, or at least based off of like the American chakra system that was founded in 1910 or in the 1910s that prioritized 7 bodies, which is, I find, I kind of have like with curanderismo, some things should be noted. Like I have a tremendous respect for it, but I do find it a shame on the energy like practice front, because there are actual energy bodies, like actual Maya energy practices. And I was skeptical of this for a long time until I was able to research it and talk to like legitimate sources. There are various types of energy body systems in ancient Mesoamerica that some have survived to this day. Some that deal with 13 energy bodies of the subtle body, some deal with 20, some deal with 3 primary energy sources. So it's actually a very rich tradition, but highly, highly mysterious. Really hard to get your hands on authentic information with that one. But I digress. I mentioned curanderismo because curanderismo, brujeria, these are the predominant ways that indigenous magic has survived to this day. And I'll mention the last major front in which it has survived, and that is known as the Daykeeper tradition. This is still alive and kicking and was very important in ushering in the end of the Maya, the indigenous genocide that was going on in Guatemala in the latter half of the 20th century. The Daykeeper tradition prioritizes itself in maintaining the esoteric sacred calendar of the Maya, known as the Cholqui or the Solquin from Yucatec Maya. And there are about 7,000 to 8,000 Daykeepers today. So, and that's a lot. Like when you consider like how many legitimate like Golden Dawn lineages, like authority figures do we have? It's not that many. So it's actually pretty plentiful. They prioritize on coming into tune with nature. They prioritize divination of the calendar. They prioritize honoring the day signs of the calendar. This is a little, now I have Daykeeper mentors, and I correspond with people in Guatemala and Daykeepers stateside. So I try to be as well versed in all of these indigenous practices as I can, but it is different from my family's personal practice. And I say my family's personal practice has evolved even from the brujeria roots too, because coming to the United States, you get more educated and you are able to, if you have the courage enough, then you can make additional bridges. So my mother is like that indigenous root, and where those additional bridges comes from are my father. He's American, but he was the Indiana Jones type, former military and a historian. So he was the one that actually took us to ruins since I was a child. And I grew a fondness for archaeology and anthropology and history.
Your dad sounds awesome.
Yeah. So like all of the, there is a gold rush of Maya authentic practice and information in academic documents, but somebody has to read it and formalize it. Mm-hmm. And that's where I come in. And that's where a lot of my current work is going. Is formalizing and shedding new light on, like even what they're doing in the Daykeeper practice and curanderismo. Some of them they're doing these incantations and they're doing these movements and stuff, and they don't really know where it comes from because of loss of information, because of colonialism, and not just colonialism of the Spanish, colonialism by the Mexican government, the Guatemalan government, the Salvadorian government. All of this, it has destroyed a lot of history to where they're doing things and they don't necessarily know where they come from. Now it doesn't. Completely, that doesn't delegitimize the practice, not at all. But what if we knew where these things came from? It opens up more pathways of information, more pathways for gnosis, and it allows us to continue to tastefully evolve practice, because we can fill in the gaps with very good educated guesses and good educated experimentation. Because even the ancients, there's evidence that they were experimenting with magical and spiritual processes since the dawn of civilization in the Americas. So where my work is going from here is I'm wrapped up in writing a 7-volume series. My first book will be out in first quarter 2026. I can't reveal who the publisher is just yet, but I'll just say that they are the best in the business. And if you are more of a scholastic occultist, you should know who they are. But I am committed to writing this 7-volume series of Maya magic and mysticism. And the why 7 volumes is because I do take a cue from what archaeologists, how they have categorized the main tenets of Mesoamerican religion. And they classify it in 5 departments. I extend it to 7 because they're looking at it from an academic's point of view. I'm looking at it from a practitioner's point of view, and I see 7 facets, not 5. And those main facets of magic from the Mesoamerican point of view would be, number 1, deity worship, which that is my first book that will come out will be about how to work with the Maya gods in a highly personable level that is a bit more akin to like how we talk about major spirits of Western esotericism, or like in a pagan sense in like other traditions where you're calling or you're devoted to this god, and so on and so forth. And why I'm doing that is because while that has not survived in any plentiful amounts to the modern day, it was very much a case in post-classic period Maya practices. So that's the first one, is deity worship. Second would be time worship. That's what the daykeepers do. That is what they do today. And there are various ritual processes of making it more personable, which is my goal, because the daykeeper practice, while amazing, is when you actually look at it, is highly, you can't really do it by yourself. You can't. They do fire ceremonies, what are known as fire ceremonies, and they're like giant fire pits. Like, you can do it, but you're probably going to get the fire department called on you, because it's you have to have a lot of space. You have to have a lot of sugar, which is highly combustible, and it's like a massive festivity. It's not something that's an easy replicable ritual. I have ritual processes of working with day signs, but in a more condensed and personal format that is just as powerful as like a group function. That's something that comments too, that we can touch on this later. A lot of Mesoamerican practice, Maya or Mexica or anything that has survived, is largely communal. And it has led to some people like of indigenous descent kind of stifling in their practice, because they know that there's a lot of community involved, but they don't know on a solitary level like how to approach it. Mm-hmm. So time magic would be second. Time worship, time magic, second. Third would be ancestral worship. With Mesoamerica, it's a very layered practice. It is not just praying to grandma. It is not just like it's not just like necromancy or anything like that. What it is working with, it can be working with royalty. It can be working with, or at least deifying the ancestors, even in a process in ancient times. They would bury deceased ancestors underneath the houses. And this was a ritualistic process of essentially like not just being close with them, but if you read how they were regarded in life versus how they were regarded after death, these people that they buried underneath their homes, these relatives, became essentially like exalted in a deification way, in an apotheosis kind of way. This is major. This isn't just, going to your local graveyard and calling on somebody who may have died a tragic death and then like asking for favors or like binding them or something. Mm-hmm. This is like a powered up version of compliance and negotiation with somebody on the other side. But the major ancestral veneration practice is that, especially in classic period Maya, this was the era of the Game of Thrones for the ancient Mesoamerican timeline. You had these deified kings that were written about, and lore and legends were highly expounded upon. Really some George R.R. Martin stuff. And the thing is that if you took the throne in any one of these city-states, they became a intermediary between the gods and humans. But after they died, they went through ritualistic processes while alive to be worthy of the throne. And it was their obligation that in death, they basically become a patron god of the city, working for the people. So how do we access these like patron gods of certain geographic regions that are still kind of upheld to their promise? Think about it as if like working magically with like a King Solomon or a Melchizedek, or to a lesser degree like a Saint Cyprian. And I say to a lesser degree because I have this discussion a lot because I grew up in the Latino folk magic, Afro-Latino folk magic community in Washington, D.C., not just like Maya stuff, not just Guatemalans. I'm talking about people from Cuba and Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Haiti, and places like this. So Saint Cyprian's a thing, but he's not really special. There's like a bunch of other saints that are held in higher regard than Saint Cyprian. I found like when I came into the Western scene and started interacting with more like groups, people, there was like a Saint Cyprian craze going on.
Oh yeah.
And that I think that's cool, but I found that a lot of these authors and authorities were saying that in Latin America, Saint Cyprian's a big deal. In Latin America, Saint Cyprian's this, and Peru, he's this, and in like Mexico, he's this. And it's like, I mean, he's there, but he's not to the degree that people are saying. I think that's something that's lost in translation or lost culturally. Mm-hmm. He's kind of a haphazard way of doing things as opposed to other, former mortal figures, right?
Mm.
So
we're still under ancestral worship. Is that right?
Yes.
We're still on number
yes.
4.
Yes.
Okay.
To close on ancestral worship, what I will say is that all of these kings went through a series of apotheosis, and a lot of their history is documented on actual temple stelae and temple sides. They're actually a bit more like with actual dates. So, and I'm just kind of bringing this for the sake of discussion. I'm not trying to offend anybody because my name is Solomon and I do practice Western magic as well. But the amount of historical evidence we have for the existence of Solomon and that mythos is mythos. Like, it's largely not solid in historical resources. However, the historical resources that support the apotheosis, the social and magical contributions, because make no mistake, they were magician kings, and they performed massive rituals that included tens of thousands of people in city plazas on massive pyramids. We have more historical evidence for figures such as Kinichana Pakal, for Khan Balam II, for Lady Shock, for Lady Six Sky, for the Snake Kings of Kalakmul. We have more evidence for them supporting their actual contributions and magical activities than we do of the mythical King Solomon. And I still think Solomon is a powerful force to summon and to work with in an intermediary way, or just like any kind of magic that you can work with. However, I do think that there is an added element of efficacious spiritual spice if you can support with history these mythical figures and magical protocols that you're going about. So that's ancestral veneration. That was number 3, right? Yeah. Deity, time, ancestor. I'll go to my other favorite one, geospatial. So geospatial, no. I'll take that back. Because we'll go through the archaeologist ones first. So the archaeologist ones are those 3 plus animism and shamanism. I'll give you quick examples of shamanism and the most readily available, like the easiest way to approach it. So a lot of people, when they think shamanism, they think taking drugs and going on trips. Well, that can be the case, but people start to really over embellish and just like get things wrong when it comes to like the tools that were used by the ancient Maya. And now there was various tools used in ancient Americas, but like ayahuasca, a lot of people want to talk about ayahuasca when they start talking to me. That's a South American thing. That's not in Central America. That's not in Mexico. If it's there now, it came from South America. I'll touch on Salvia Divinorum because while that's not inherently, it's not technically Maya, it is Zapotec, and it comes from Oaxaca, Mexico. And the Zapotecs and the Mixtecs that would come after the Zapotecs, they did trade this, and you do find bits of it in Guatemala. You find bits of it in Yucatan and Belize, but that's actually more of a highlight of just how expansive the trade in ancient Mesoamerica was amongst different civilizations. You do find some weird off like mushroom stuff in Guatemala, but the biggest pre-Columbian narcotic that was used was coffee enemas. It sounds funny, but it would induce visions. And there was actually a deity of the coffee enema and a deity of another hallucinogenic alcoholic beverage called balche and Stabentun. And Stabentun, like you can get Stabentun today pretty easily. I have like 2 big bottles of Stabentun from Mexico in there. And in Guatemala, there's Kusha. And Kusha is it's really just moonshine, but all of this was like alcohol and as an enema as well. And coffee enemas were used to induce trances and visions. So if you are doing ayahuasca and think you're being Mayan, check again, nut up, do a coffee enema. I'm just kidding. But
Well, Janice is a big fan of enemas in general, so this is interesting.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to refute that assertion.
let me bring this up too, because we do have a scholarly crowd, and I appreciate that. This is a good knowledge check for like if somebody knows their basic Mayan history or not, or if they're a charlatan. So like people like Billy Carson and a lot of those ancient alien fellows, they are charlatans because they're saying Mayan more often than not. So in the classic academic sense, the word Mayan is only used for the calendar and the Mayan languages. Maya for everything else. So it's Maya gods or Maya people. However, it's a good knowledge check. And if they can't explain why they're using the word Mayan instead of Maya, then they're probably a charlatan. But I will tell you this right now. That is starting to change, and starting to change more in like non-official and traditional ways. So I use the terms interchangeably because sometimes like we're speaking English and Mayan just rolls off the tongue better to describe things. You have an authentic source of spiritual knowledge out there called the Mayan Wisdom Project. Now, I will say that the Mayan Wisdom Project is a bit more tame for like our crowd when it comes to like deliberate, like all out kind of visceral rituals. But the Mayan Wisdom Project is headed by a Daykeeper lineage that traces itself back to the late and great Carlos Barrios, who was he was a famous Maya Daykeeper. And his descendants run that program. I'm a member of that program, and I totally recommend it. We can talk more about that at the end as far as legitimate sources. They are few, but some are there. But to what degrees are they there? That's another question too, because I don't want to paint any one of these resources as something that they're not. I don't want you to think that if you go to them, you're going to learn how to do a physical evocation of the serpent god or something like that. That's not what it's about. It's a bit more subtle. So Maya, Mayan, just clearing the airways. I use them both interchangeably. At times, I prefer to use the academic correct Maya for the majority of the time. But like modern day Maya people, they will use both interchangeably as well. Even anthropologists like Luke Caverns, who is legit, who's a member of the Maya Exploration Center, he did a presentation at Cosmic Summit about 1 or 2 years ago called Mayan Atlantis. He admits that the Mayan thing was just because it's like grammatically just sounds better to go with his presentation. So shamanism, the other way that it manifests, I would say in the most overt and powerful way for Mesoamerica is what's called Nagualism. And it's essentially Mesoamerican lycanthropy. It's having relationships with animal spirits and possibly shape-shifting with them, but it's more so doing magic through animal spirits in cooperation with animal spirits. And you still hear like crazy folklore that comes from south of the border when it comes to Nahuals. So like were-jaguars were a thing. Were-jaguars were a thing with the Olmec. They were a thing with the Maya. I believe they were a thing with the Aztec as well. And it's still very much a part of the practice when it comes to Mesoamerican shamanism. I would say, like, if you're not prioritizing Nahualism, then you're not actually doing legitimate Mesoamerican shamanism. And then the last academic category is animism. Animism, we all kind of got a feeling for what animism is right now, so I'm not going to go through the weeds on that. But I'll give you the best examples, I believe, from the Maya traditions and Maya homeland of what that manifested in. The people's relation to food, such as cacao and corn, and realizing that they have a holy resonance about them. So to work with them, you're entering in some kind of conversation with the spirit of that, and that needs to be honored. But the biggest and most important display of animism in Mesoamerican history is that of working with jadeite, because now this is really too much for this conversation, but I'll touch on the basic elements. Is it a fortune tool? Does it grant good fortune? Does it grant good luck? Does it grant abundance? Does it grant power? Yes, it does all those. But unlike other crystals that are kind of glorified in the modern like crystal space or metaphysical space, jadeite we can find in exalted troves in Maya burial sites. We know that these kings prioritized jade and jadeite. It was worth more than gold. It was the most valuable currency and display of wealth in the ancient Maya world. I'll say this much about its magical properties. If you look at a Native American medicine wheel, it kind of mirrors the Mesoamerican directions as well. The directions are associated with colors: white, black, red, and yellow for the 4 directions. But there is a 5th direction in Mesoamerican cosmology. That is center. Center to designate the center of the sacred Seba tree, the Yashche, the cosmological tree. Now, you find this in other traditions too, this idea of the cosmological tree. But when the ruler is wearing all this jade and doing ceremony, it's basically saying that it is aligned to the central direction. So if you let your imagination spool on that, the implications can be pretty wide with the capacities of jadeite used in ritual, which the ancients did do. I'll just say this much to close out on the animism portion, is that keep in mind that the Spaniards made jade illegal, the possession of it, because it was idolatry. That it was so sacred to the Maya that it was held as idolatry. So they destroyed all visible jade deposits that they could, and Maya abandoned jade for the sake of their lives. So jadeite in Mesoamerican practice was vacant for a long time until the 1970s, when archaeologists Mary Lou Reidinger and her husband rediscovered the jade mines of Montagua River Valley in Guatemala. Now jade has been making an impact coming back into Mesoamerican practice, but for a long time it was missing. That's how revered it was. So on the note of crystal magic, this is like an actual crystal worth investing in, I believe, and actually developing a resonance with and a protocol with. I am not a real big believer in like crystal magic as like how it's pitched, but this is an example of where it does fit the bill for crystal magic technically, and it's not a waste of time. You're not just buying some tumbled stones and then, positive vibes, while ripping a bong. You are engaging with a highly metaphysical tool. Even in tumbled states, but there's an art to tumbled states, I will say that, of how to use tumbled, because a lot of people like they buy some tumbled stones and they think it's going to like help their love life or something. When it's tumbled and stuff, you have to engage it somewhere. You could say you could charge it or whatever, but you got to do something a bit more interesting with it. Like even if you have like some kind of fancy stone, the only ones I think having on your person to kind of like play a passive, like bring me some kind of vibe thing would be like a necklace or something. But like when you are carving tools and stuff, that's where crystal magic really shines in my opinion. And jadeite's a good example of that. So that's the 5 categories that archaeologists have pointed out. I extend it to 6. Extend it to 7. The 6th one is geospatial worship. So what do I mean by that? The rudimentary model for that is the 4 directions. But this bleeds into other things. So there are principalities of the 4 directions. We know them in Western esotericism. I'm sure your audience does too. In Mesoamerican practice, there are very many, depending on culture or like city-state culture and era and time, the nature of those principalities change dramatically. However, all of them are very powerful, because if you think about it, geospatial magic is almost like it's one of the most immediate forms of magic where you can engage in, because no matter where you are, you're facing a direction. Like you are here in the physical world and we're facing a direction. So it's literally not just, don't think just directions, think physical dimensionality. And I do mean physical dimensionality as per physics. So 1 dimension, 2 dimension, 3 dimension. What's on the other axis of a 4th? What's on the other axis of a 5th? These are things that carry on in very subtle ways, even in modern day folkloric indigenous practices, such as a lot of those cryptids that are kind of caught on tape and then immediately not there kind of thing. That would fall under geospatial phenomena, I believe, because if you watch the images enough, there's something going on with how they're distorting physical space, or the physical space around them is distorted, and in ways that they don't make sense pedestrian-wise, but if you continue the conversation, they start to make sense, but they start to make sense in more of a physics way. Like you have to actually get in the grassroots of dimensional physics. So think your four directions. These are deities that are displayed as giants, or like the four primordial humans. Geospatial worship is a very big part of Mesoamerican practice. Even meeting at a crossroads is geospatial magic. And there's parts of the Popol Vuh that reflect that as well. And that's different from temporal dimensionality. Geospatial dimensionality is different from temporal dimensionality. They go hand in hand, obviously, like the theory of relativity, think like that. But as for per practice, you can blend the two, or you can distinguish the two as well.
So you're talking about spirits of time and spirits of place.
Yes. So like the day signs I mentioned earlier, time worship, time magic, that's your temporal dimensionality magic. The four directions, like what are known as the Bakabs, or the giants that hold up the cosmos, that are associated with the four directions, or the Balameb, which are the four primordial humans that gave birth to all humans, and then led them to the first dawning of the sun. That's geospatial. Now the two can be blended, and oftentimes in the Daykeeper tradition, they are blending the two as well. In the Daykeeper tradition, they prioritize the Balameb, but they do go hand in hand, which is a very odd kind of coincidence that it shares with physics, like the theory of relativity and space and time when you're trying to orient yourself in the universe. But in practice, you can work with them in isolation as well. So the benefits and the impact of working, if you can distinguish them, right, and you can practice with them separately, and there's like systems that follow up from there, I believe it's worth distinguishing. So therefore, I plug in. I am patenting this as a category of magic. A geospatial worship and geospatial magic is a part of Mesoamerican practice, because they go on and on. They have legends about it, just as is. So we should treat it as such. And the seventh form of Mesoamerican magic / religion would be narrative worship, or narrative manipulation. Some chaos magicians might be familiar with this, but this is actually a very old practice that is, it's recorded on the walls of, most notably, the city-state of Palenque. So Palenque, King Kanichana Pakal, was able to reform the city's religion in a narrative format by basically, the old kings were not upkeeping the rituals to the gods, and the old kings were destroyed. They had knowledge on ritual, but they were destroyed by the city-state of Calakmul. Think almost like Evil Empire kind of city-state, like your main antagonist for the story. Pakal ascended to the throne at 12 years old. So he was at a bunch of disadvantages. But one thing that he was facing was the disorganization of the people, in a spiritual sense, but also in a leadership sense. So what he did was he made a series of rituals and had a series of monuments erected and built that funneled into, used elements of pre-existing mythology with elements of new mythology that gave him legitimacy. And the device in which he did this is essentially a metaphysical place called Matwil, a place that, when you read about it, oddly resembles the sometimes the white canvas of paper, as if it's being written upon. So essentially making new narratives gives power. So I guess to play devil's advocate, you say, oh, he just made stuff up. The thing is, though, is that after making this stuff up, why did it stick and why was it powerful? Because his descendants and further kings, after his death, would depict him, Pakal, in their motifs and in their etched carvings on temple walls and stelae as him giving legitimacy to them. So this narrative manipulation was powerful enough to affect geopolitics for hundreds of years after, really up until the collapse of the classic period. So yeah, hundreds of years post his death. This is not unlike when you listen to the testimonies of certain chaos magicians about how they wrote themselves into stories and then they kind of published the stories and then things were happening in their lives that reflected the story. So narrative magic, narrative manipulation has existed in Mesoamerican practice for a very long time. And this also extends to folklore too. So like the legend of El Sombreron, the legend of La Llorona. And La Llorona is actually essentially a dissemination of a pre-Columbian goddess. And this is if you, I know you mentioned the Popol Vuh earlier. If you have Dennis Tedlock's translation, if you go to his endnotes, he will explain the actual origin of La Llorona and its connection to the goddess Ishtar. But some of these spirits are essentially new narrative, lesser versions of Mesoamerican deities. Now, you could say that's synchronization, but it's not necessarily, because synchronization would mean they were swapped with like Catholic saints. There is no deity that they were swapped with. It was more like situational things. And what I mean by that is like, in the case of La Llorona, you have a clash of cultures, the story of the clash of cultures. And the story is typically this indigenous woman who has a relationship with a European man, and he leaves her for a European woman. Meanwhile, she bears his children, and she's distraught over it. So it's not a Catholic saint that's being interwoven. It is a narrative, and has given spawn to essentially a whole species of spirit, of wraiths called Ixtabeyob in Maya. That's how you say it, but they're La Llorona spirits. And fair note about that spirit, it is a very real spirit. Like if you ever need kind of convincing about all this spirit stuff, just go on YouTube and type in La Llorona sightings, and there's enough video footage of that to like defy like explanation. You go to Guatemala City, I know this because of my grandmother's side. My abuelo, he had encounters with La Llorona. You go to the police station in Guatemala City, they have a whole section of their logbook that accounts for La Llorona sightings, because typically when La Llorona sightings happen, people disappear. So they have to get it logged in at the police station. But like El Sombreron too, he is or in Mexico, he's called El Charro Negro. It's not a Catholic saint that's being interwoven. It's the evolution of some kind of folkloric narrative where a mariachi or a famous bicycle or horse racer will make a deal with the quote unquote devil at the crossroads, sell his soul. And then a few years later, he becomes the devil's debt collector. So he's like a Hispanic ghost rider, essentially. And he looks as such. He looks like a mariachi skeleton, all dapper on a horseback, collecting contracts. People who make deals with the quote-unquote devil.
That's cool.
Yeah, so like that's what I mean by narrative evolution and narrative magic and narrative worship. These are things that are very much still alive. Just people aren't, I don't think they're looking at them in the most detailed way. But those are the 7 main categories of Mesoamerican practice. One other thing I will clear up, it's a misconception, it is a beginner misconception, but since I touched on the linguistic thing about Maya versus Mayan, touch on this too. A lot of people think that there was some kind of Mayan empire. There was never a Mayan empire. The Maya were a loose confederation of city-states. And it didn't stop some of them from trying to become an empire. Calakmul was the one that was trying to become an empire, and at one point was the most powerful Maya city-state. But the Maya were they were like an alliance-based culture, but it was not an empire. It's honestly closer to Game of Thrones throughout all of its history, rather than Star Wars, you know.
Well, and that's normative for many places. I mean, Greece was the same way. People think of Greece as like one monoculture, when in fact, no, these guys were at each other's throats. There was different kings. You know, you go all over the world, it was like that.
Italy, Japan.
So, yeah, it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah, I will say though, it's like, so where does that confusion come from? Probably it's because the word Mayan and empire sounds cool, but it's also because the Aztecs actually were an empire. The Aztecs were an empire. They were trying to kick everybody's ass and assimilate them into the empire and have that kind of empire economic and political system. But that wasn't the case for the Maya. In fact, the first democracy in the New World was called the League of Mayapan in the 1400s. It was a democratic republic, and it utilized council systems and such to run its government. Fun fact: a lot of people, 1776 was not the first democracy, but yeah, no, the Aztecs were an empire. But another thing to consider is that the Aztecs were only around for 300 years prior to contact with Europe. The Maya were around for 3,500 years. And that's not the entire history of Mesoamerica, too, because we can extend that to the Proto-Maya and to the Olmec and the Epi-Olmec. And I will say this because a lot of these cultures, sometimes they do bleed into each other. The Aztecs actually don't come from Mexico. They settled in Mexico, but they're originally from the Southwest United States. And not just the Southwest United States. They have origins that reach up even to like around Ohio. So
interesting.
They migrated into Mexico, and they essentially found remnants of the Toltec and Teotihuacano culture, and that's where their pantheon really blossoms from. I don't want to say it doesn't all come from there. Huitzilopochtli is very much their deity, but Tlaloc and Quetzalcoatl, that comes and sprouts from the pre-existing Teotihuacano culture that had collapsed by the time of the arrival of the Aztecs. So, and again, since we're touching on like kind of migration patterns and origins, believe it or not, you find Maya people were here in the continental United States. The trade routes throughout all of Maya history were vast. You will find Maya jade and obsidian in southeast United States, the southwest United States, like the Okmulgee Mounds. I visited the Okmulgee Mounds, and in their little museum that they have there, they have Mesoamerican artifacts. So they were trading that far, but we also find the bodies and the skeletons of Maya people in Cahokia. And this is because when Chichen Itza was on the downfall, Cahokia was on the rise. So people that were fleeing Chichen Itza either settled in the city-states of Mayapan, which was still in the Yucatan Peninsula, but some of them kept going north. And they went north all the way to Cahokia. So it's very much an American form of ancient civilization. And I mean America in totality. And even sprouting to South America, because the original languages formed in Mesoamerica. The original languages were Maya is the one that is the original language. There were essentially like as a full-fledged language and hieroglyphic system. That's all Maya, and that influenced even the Inca. That kind of trend of language and written language followed all the way down to South America. So yes, it's very much an American of the land kind of magic and pantheon and paradigm of the various forms of magic and cosmovision.
Awesome. Yeah, that was super fascinating. I just want to make sure we got all 7. So I have deity worship, time worship, ancestral worship, shamanism, animism, geospatial narrative.
Yes.
Am I missing any? That's
that's all of them. I repeat it in my head daily. So that's all of them.
Is animism, shamanism, those are separate, or
they are separate? They are separate.
Got it.
And academia separates those two for their own reasons. I separate them, and again, all of these things, they interweave into each other. Yeah. So nobody should be like quoting me as like they must be separate all the time. No, they interweave throughout each other all the time. Yeah. But the reason why I piggyback my categorization off of the academic categorization, it's not just because I'm trying to sound fancy and be more official. It's because when you approach it in a ritual context for practical reasons, those categories do help. They help in how you can actually construct your ritual and how you prioritize your mental approach to how you're going to prioritize it. Because you will find the personified Maya deities of the deity worship category. You will find them in the time worship thing, because in the time worship fashion, it's almost like, again, it's not like personified entities. The day signs are not necessarily personified entities. They're almost like they're snapshots of certain segments of Maya mythology. So in those snapshots, you're going to have characters. You will have deific characters. So the deities are contained in the time worship system, and then vice versa. And then like they go in and out of each other. Shamanism, animism, like it sounded like, yeah, they sound like they can be almost the same thing. But now let's approach it through ritual. Now we're dealing with a few different specificities that the details, I don't want to say the details are make or break, but they can help you get better results, and they can help you like really fine tune and be like, wow, I had an experience there because I prioritized going for my connection with like the Jaguar spirit, as opposed to I'm trying to, everything's alive and everything's one. And it's like all this like crazy stuff.
Too much.
Because it becomes too much and it becomes a little bit disorganized. So I find that these categories help when it comes to engaging in ritual and engaging with that cosmovision.
Now, I'd like to use the system that we've articulated thus far to kind of dive in sequentially into some more detail with each one of those categories. And then after that, talk about, and maybe all along the way, talk about what practice looks like. And I think we started with the gods. So what are some of the prominent deities that in your practice and in the current, the modern practice, not just the historical, but like what's going on right now? What are some of the deities that are prominent, that are active, that you've made contact with, that are a part of the sort of ever evolving tradition as it exists now?
Yeah. So that's a great way to put it. So let's go over the historical ones that are clearly like the big players, and then we can go personal life path, and then I'll give you some examples of manifestations too. So the big ones historically, you're talking about Chak, the rain god, who's depicted all over temple sites in Mesoamerica, has entire city-states dedicated to him. We're talking about Ka'awil, who is the god of lightning, who is sometimes equated with Chak, more often than not equated with Chak, because he is essentially the living thunder. Chak is described with an axe, and when he summons the lightning by striking with the axe. Odd synchronicity, I guess, or odd coincidence that, we have figures like Thor and Shango that they wield an axe or a hammer and do very similar things, or Zeus with thunderbolts too, but like the axe is a very prominent symbol. But Ka'awil was a symbol of dynasty as well. He was used as a scepter by certain Maya rulers, but he's the living thunderbolt deity and of shamanistic magic, just like the raw force of magic kind of thing. You have other deities like Hunalye, or otherwise known as Yum Ka'ash, who is the corn deity. Why was corn important? This we could do a whole presentation on this, but I'll just go over it quickly. Obviously, it's the corn that corn fed them, and people take corn for granted now, but corn was native to the Americas. And once things like corn, quinoa, spices, tomatoes were introduced to Europe, prior to contact, Europe had a very malnourished diet. And just the discovery and the imports of food from the Americas increased life expectancy within the first 50 years of contact in Europe by 10%. So just think like you had an American multivitamin getting injected into Europe, suppository style. But the other thing that corn corresponds to is what humans are made of. We're made of corn in the mythology. The gods attempt to make humans 4 times. At first, they create the animals, but the animals can't worship them. They can't speak. So then they grant humans speech, but they make them out of mud and they're hollow. Then they try making them out of wood and they're hollow. And it's only when they're made out of corn do they have this gifted you could say consciousness, but it's a divine spark. It's the divine spark. And speech is what makes us very important. Speech is what distinguishes us literally against everything else in the cosmos. Look at it from a real cosmic scale, not even just an Earth scale. Who's talking out there? Nobody. So speech really distinguishes us from everything else out there. So the corn deity is big. The sun deity Kanichahao is big in classic times, where I'm mentioning ones that had like actual temples dedicated to them. I'll also mention the Maya goddess Ixchel, because she's prominent in there is a modern day, or a more modern, probably colonial era statue or recreation of colonial era statues in Cozumel Island, Mexico, where she is the goddess of weaving. A lot of people just say she's the moon goddess. Really, she's like the supreme goddess. In the Popol Vuh, they go by slightly different names because it's a Quiche Maya document, not a Yucatec Maya document. The Yucatec Maya name is Ixchel, but in Quiche and Cachiquel, there's several different names. The one that you find on repeat, though, is usually Ixmucane. And Ixmucane and Ixbiacoc is also known as Itzamna in Yucatan. They are the divine couple, the grand duality from which everything else comes from. So she's an uber powerful goddess because if you took away everything else in the universe, the only things that would be lasting would be them. They are light and dark, push and pull, those kinds of dichotomies. So they're big in the history. They're big in my practice too, but there's plenty of more Maya deities that they don't necessarily have giant displays on temples, but doesn't make them any less legitimate because, okay, they don't have temples, but, I've summoned them, and also they're in these sacred codices. The codices depict a lot of astrological and religious and agricultural activity, phenomena, ritual, and protocol. And there's plentiful amounts of deities in there, and they survive in folklore too. So even if they didn't have massive temples carved out of them, they are still very important. Before I touch on them, I'll be remiss if I didn't mention Kukulkan, the feather plume serpent deity. Kukulkan is very much the same character as Quetzalcoatl. There's some differences here and there, but they're very much it's pretty much accepted that they're the same. The Mesoamerican serpent deity, the divine serpent, vision serpent, is him. I'll get on this story really quick. I remember one time, I think it was in 2016 or 2017. Now it's a viral video, but I was doing ritual with Kukulkan for about a week, and I was trying to really break through because I had found a new way of doing the magic. And I was I need a sign that this is going to work, this kind of protocol is going to work, and that you will answer me when I call on you in this kind of fashion. And you can find the video, you can find it on Facebook, you can find it on YouTube. Just search a little dust devil at Chichen Itza, the temple of Kukulkan, his temple. There's this dust devil going around the main plaza by the temple, by the famous temple, and people are dancing in it. They're running in and out. And then that same video shows the dust devil retracting up into the sky in a spiral in a serpentine fashion. It's one of those signs, it's where I know, because it happened the day after I had done the ritual, and I that was my confirmation. Because he's also typically a very friendly deity. So he interacted. That was very much in character for him. I'll say that. Other story time, because we mentioned chalk. So to highlight just how alive these deities are, in July, this past July 4th weekend, one of these fancy timeshare tourism companies erected a statue of Poseidon to kind of cater to its European and American audiences. And they put it in a shallow swimway on a beach by their timeshare. And, it's your typical depiction of Chad Greek gods with six-pack abs, long beard, bulging biceps kind of thing. And they decided to put the statue up despite knowing that they're like, this is the Riviera Maya. This is, this is where people vacation to, but it is indigenous territory. And they didn't account that for the indigenous deities. So the indigenous Maya had kind of like, there was people on both sides. Some people didn't care, but some people were very up in arms about it. They were like, this is bad. Like this is just like, it's racist. Like, you're appealing to people with money that are not from here, and you're ignoring our culture. That week, like literally after the day after it was erected, a Class 5 hurricane came, and you can look this up. Like there's websites, there's YouTube videos documenting this. This Class 5 hurricane destroyed the Poseidon statue, and it left it fractured to where it was now endangered for swimmers. So they had some construction company had to come and move it out. And what they did instead, they just erected it this past week, is a statue of the rain god and the god of the oceans, Chalk, in Mexico, because everybody was like, once the Poseidon statue got destroyed, they were like, Chalk was not happy about that. And this isn't a commentary or a dig on like Poseidon, because I guarantee you the tourist people that erected that statue, they're not devout pagans of the Greek god Poseidon. They're rich, affluent Anglo-Saxon people trying to, milk the Riviera Maya for tourism. And they're trying to do it through like other American dollars and stuff. So it was done with bad intentions, and bad intentions were met with it from the rain god Chalk. And I think that's a pretty clear, like, magical to material world manifestation, because I was talking about this issue to people when July 4th happened, like around that time when the statue was destroyed. But now they have erected the statue of Chalk. That's pretty much a victory, This. So, and again, this isn't like Mayan gods versus everybody else or anything like that. It's, if you're going to in place like a divine shrine, like even if it's like for tourism and stuff, it's a symbol, right? Symbols mean things. Symbols have power. And if you're going to do it on somebody else's land, again, it's like respecting land spirits, except this was even bigger than that. It was, respecting the macrocosmic idea of the rain god and the god of the oceans. So, and they didn't do that. And that's what happens. I'm sure if you did the reverse side and like what's that famous town in Greece with the blue walkways and whatnot? It's the vacation spot. Santorini, that's it. Yeah, right. Santorini. If you did that, if you erected a Chalk statue in Santorini, how tasteful would that be?
Right.
Like.
So what's it look like? So what is interaction with communication with the gods of this tradition look like in your practice?
So I guess I'll highlight on the other deities that don't have exposure too, because I'll use them as an example.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So the ones that don't have as much exposure, but are very like subtly interwoven, not just in like codices or folklore, but if you look at the landscape, right, of like actual societal events that happen down there. And again, like, we're in America, right? We don't get, like, the only news about Mexico we typically get is just them coming over the border, right? But like certain things that happen down there reflect certain deities, their MOs. So like one very obscure deity that I have a very big connection with was Buluk Chaptan, who is essentially, he was the god of war. Now, asterisks, like, especially throughout Mesoamerican history, you're talking about a culture that had a ritualistic process to war. So almost every deity was a war deity. But he was the one that was seen as like the most savage of the war. Like, he was war. Like, he was that. Think like just like really raw, like Blood Meridian type stuff, right? He is a deity I've had probably the most intimate relationship with, because I was a soldier for a number of years. I was an MMA fighter, so the ideas of warfare were bound to me for long periods of time. You find him in codices. You don't find him, and you find him in folklore sparingly, but you don't find temples made for this guy because probably wouldn't want to bring his influence around you as much as you needed. So for a deity such as him, there are certain correspondences. And again, the biggest thing you need is language. So like to have some kind of incantation is the biggest part when it comes to summoning the deities. I get my incantations from primarily the books of Chilam Bilam, which are colonial era texts that were written by indigenous priests that were recounting prophecies. They're books of prophecies, they're books of agriculture, and they're books of history, like the history of like the post-classic cities like Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Mayapan. But they're also chronicling the Spanish conquest at the time. And Chilam Bilam is a very, very enigmatic text. About 80% of my incantations come from that book. Some of them need, some of them I do place tasteful gnosis into them because it was during the Spanish conquest. And some of these towns, they weren't united. Some of them adopted Catholic concepts more than others. So some of the incantations come from towns that were like very pro-indigenous, and they were like, we're going to stay indigenous. Some of those incantations, I haven't had to change a single word. And then some, they're like, we want to keep our indigenous gods, but they are going to kill us if we don't mention this bearded guy in the sky. So we have to include him. A note about Chilam Bilam, the books. Elizabeth actually picked up the book one time, and I tried. I told her that it's you'll find like weird angel magic in that one too, depending on the towns that was recorded from. It's very reminiscent of the grimoire tradition. The art, a lot of like how it's written. There's a lot of like grimoire type stuff in there. Now, as far as making a workable grimoire out of it, just addressing it now, like you're not going to be able to. It's like way too disorganized. It's really just like it's way too much of a collage of things. But there's a lot of interesting cosmology. And this is also, I like to say that the indigenous people's struggle in a metaphysical sense is also a Gnostic struggle. And what do I mean by that? Is because in Chilam Bilam, you have really, you have the details of a kind of spiritual species that is all about oppression and literally claims to be the one and only God. And then it's obtuse to other books in the same collection of books that talks about the indigenous gods. This type of spirit is called the Kashlan. So the word Kashlan, we can deduce that it comes from the word Castile, as in like Castilian Spain. But the certain Chilams distinguished the spirits of the Kashlan, or like the Spaniards, as being these Kashlanic, almost mechanical spirits that stole the holiness of the what are called the precious stones, but they're essentially like the heavenly powers of the indigenous gods. And they started crafting their own world. And they list these Kashlan and their principalities. And they have strange names, very strange names. And they list them in a planetary correspondence with the 7 planets. Like the Kashlan of Jupiter is called Alpilcon, which is more than likely an indigenous word. But some of them have Latin words or Latin-inspired words, such as like the Kashlan of Mars, which is called Esperas. These entities are very, very reminiscent of the Gnostic idea of archons. Now, there is no way that the indigenous people had access to Nag Hammadi in the 1500s, right? I think what they were experiencing was this difference in spirits between, we have indigenous gods, we have the Kashlan, and we have angels, because you will find Gabriel, Michael, you'll find Melchizedek mentioned in the books of Chilam Bilam. So they had a very clear idea of what angels were. They had an idea of what the Maya deities were. And they had an idea of what this weird category of spirits that was somewhere in between, that was malefic, called the Kashlan. And their chief was called a Hawashel or a Jawashel, which was equated to the Christian God. So the indigenous people's struggle is very much a Gnostic struggle. And if you look at it, like really, like, you know, Gnosticism is seen as like a sci-fi mechanical overlord, like trying to convert everybody to its own data sphere by use of like mechanical, cold, soulless tools. Is that not what happened in 1519? And, you know, 1492, but also, and then 1519, and then the conquest of the Americas? That's as Gnostic as you get, with these alien things coming down and trying to take over your world.
Super interesting. That's a cool connection. So for your personal practice, how much of it is, because you have a family connection, and then you have this connection through the texts and through the source material. Do you ever? We spoke about a mutual friend, Balthazar, who we've had on the show. He obviously does the hoodoo, which is the African traditional magic, but he mixes it with like the Solomonic and the Grimoire. Do you mix your Western techniques with your traditional indigenous stuff, or do you keep them completely separate? Or I don't even know. Do you even do Western magic?
I do Western magic. I have a pretty devout like archangel practice. I do not mix. I have separate altars in completely separate rooms, and the ritual processes they're different. I will say that like the real benefit that Western magic has had for me is that I started realizing that we're talking about very similar things. And it's like, oh, there is power in indigenous magic, and there's actually higher concepts than what is just in folk tradition, just in folk magic. There's like higher cosmological implications. And they do reflect things that are in the Western canon. And that's tremendous, because I think there's like there's a bias towards Western esotericism that, because this isn't with everybody, but I can tell you, coming from a biracial background, this is definitely the case. People look at the white man's magic as being more powerful, just like straight up. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily the case. And the more I practiced like Western magic, I cross-reference it with other things. I found that, you know, like almost any magic is as powerful as any other. The difference, I think, where it comes in is blending practicality with higher cosmological themes. If you can do that, then all of these different forms of magic are basically as equally they're, you know, mm-hmm. equally as efficacious. So, but to answer your question, I do not mix. I do not mix tools. I do not mix prayers. I try to remove as much of the Catholicism and syncretism as I can, because the thing, and the reason why is not just a native pride thing, is because if you sift through archaeological documents, there is like legit indigenous like incantations and indigenous protocol. And it's just like, it's my responsibility as a historian, but as a practitioner, it's like, that's legwork, and I have to do it in order to enhance my practice. A lot of people don't want to do that, so that's why some people just don't practice at all, or they'll start mixing things. A lot of the things that happen in modern occultism and modern metaphysical practices is just like a whole bunch of distasteful conflation and cultural appropriation. Just look at the whole manifesting community, and all of the like chakras have been abused. And thrown into various kinds of like corny cultural appropriating protocols and stuff. And
whole world is trash, fam.
What was that?
Whole world is trash, fam. That whole world is trash.
Yeah. So it's like, exactly. And it's honestly racist, and it just like detracts from the actual quality of the performance and the magic. A lot of these people that do kind of do these weird dabbling, cultural appropriating systems. It's not the magic, I don't think, that's necessarily working for them. Sometimes it is, but it's really just their material platform. They're typically people that are well off. So it's like a lot of things are going to go right for them.
Right.
So along the lines that we were just discussing, though, let's talk saints for a minute, because you were talking about how there are different saints. And I'm sure when you're speaking about the saints, you're not only talking about Roman condoned saints, but probably folk saints as well. How does that phenomenon in the curanderismo and the brujeria and that tradition, which, I think some people tend to see Catholicism as an Italian American, for instance. Catholicism is a big part of our heritage, but there's also a really archaic Aboriginal witchcraft tradition, different branches and forms of it in Italy. This over, 2,000 years, of course, Catholicism is synthesized with that. So you can't just say it's an overlay. Like in voodoo, it's the same thing. The voodoo is not, the saints are part of voodoo, and they're not just all masks for Loa. Sometimes actual saints will show up during a ceremony, and they're the actual saint. And so there's a connection to the cult of the dead here. There's a euhemeristic divinization of virtuous humans who are integrated with powers of nature. Then there's saints that are used as masks for natural forces and earlier deities. And I'm wondering how that ends up manifesting and playing out in your tradition, and what that looks like in the lived practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the biggest examples, I'm going to stretch this into like Mexico and Central America, because they are relevant, because they're geographically they're adjacent to Maya things. And again, I grew up in Afro-Latino folk magic culture, which is still to this day very big in Washington, D.C. Like it's a whole culture of magic that Western pagans in that area either they know exists, but they won't go there because they just feel awkward talking to people that are different than them, or they just don't know it's there at all because there's just a cultural language barrier that you would need to cross. But like the narco saints are a good example to start with. I'll just list off the famous ones first, and then I'll get into the ones that correspond to something Mesoamerican. The big ones are Santa Muerte, of course. That's a trending one these days. San Simon is one. San Ramon Nanatas, El Niño de Atocha, and Jesus Malverde. The two that really that actually are traceable Mesoamerican wise are Santa Muerte and San Simon. So I have a lot of opinions about Santa Muerte. I have a lot of well-informed opinions about Santa Muerte because this is a culture, this is a deity I grew up with in the Botanicas. That's a whole nother tangent, but I will say that Santa Muerte as a spiritual entity is based off of the Maya and Aztec death goddess, or a manifestation of it.
Not to interrupt you, Flo, but this is, you anticipated a question I was going to ask you, because I was going to ask you about Santa Muerte. So actually, if you're open to the tangent, that's anticipating a question that I was going to ask you anyhow.
Let me do that after I cover her and San Simon really quick, because Santa Muerte is based off of the Aztec death goddess whose name escapes me. You got to keep in mind that Nahuatl as a language is very different from Maya, and it can be a mouthful for me. Like it's really different. But the Maya name for this deity that it's based off of would be Vucubcame. It is still a composite saintly spirit. Like we'll touch on that. We'll get back on that tangent. But it's based off of a Mesoamerican spirit, right? San Simon is based off of a really has a very enigmatic history. But San Simon you can trace in certain communities in Guatemala, he's called Mashimon. The reason why he's called Mashimon is because the she part of the name is very like, it's kind of like it's almost like when a culture just like mispronounces a word, like how there's several of these words in English, right, that Americans will mispronounce from proper English, like across the pond English. And so indigenous people kept mispronouncing San Simon as Mashimon. You go back far enough, you can trace Mashimon to the god of cacao of the Maya. He has a few other like saintly figures and cultural heroes kind of thrown in with him, but you can, and there's a great article that does explain this, trace his lineage to the Maya god of chocolate called Ectua or Bolonyoctecu. He has a lot of different names. And he very much acts the same way. He's almost like an underground mafia boss in his demeanor. But he is there's a whole cult of Mashimon that is huge in Guatemala and actually has followers in the United States too. And he's a very visible and vocal spirit. Very powerful spirit. Very trickster.
Him for?
What's up?
What do people petition him for?
Literally anything. Like he's mercurial in a way that is like literally anything. But the common ones are wealth. But you can ask him for protection. You can ask him for love. You can ask him for all kinds of things. Mashimon is a very versatile spirit. I think, but in my personal experience and like coming from the culture, there was somebody from the Western who's American. He was asking me like tips with working with Mashimon, and this guy wasn't necessarily the most like he just didn't like to stick to things. And I think really working with Mashimon, unless you are embedded in that culture, that's like an advanced kind of thing to do. It's because that's a spirit that like think you're trickster deity, think you are leaving yourself open for tricks, and that is not white belt territory. That is more advanced territory, especially to keep yourself composed and not to be tempted by certain things. That's a part. See, because the thing is, when you enter with any deity, but especially Mashimon, especially Ectua, you are now entering into a narrative. You are not just like, I am this powerful sorcerer and I am making a deal with you. No, you are entering a narrative where being tricked is kind of par for the course. Now, how badly you're tricked is up to you and how well you can compose yourself. So that's advanced practitioner territory, in my opinion. The people down there kind of have an inherent knowledge of how it works, so it's almost instinctual. It's just very talent-based instinctual because they're raised in it. But yes, those are the two main ones. Those are the two that are based off of Mesoamerican, like pre-Columbian entities. The others are Catholic saints. They are used by like various people of the folk magic scene, and drug cartels. Now, you want me to do the thing about Santa Muerte?
Yeah.
So here's my most professional analysis of a Santa Muerte thing. I do. So while some people want to get smart and they say like, oh well, Santa Muerte is not a real Catholic saint. The Catholic Church has denounced Santa Muerte, says she's not a real saint. So like it blends in with their weird vegan Satanism that's very like hip and stuff. The thing is that Santa Muerte, while being a composite of an ancient Mesoamerican deity, is also a composite of the Virgin of Guadalupe. That's where that regalia comes from. The veiled thing, that's Catholic imagery. And yes, while the Catholic Church, like the Vatican, denounced Santa Muerte, true believing Catholics south of the border but still believe in Santa Muerte, and they will still go to church, and they will still pray to Jesus, and they will still pray to forgiveness. It is still like this apologetic approach. So, and this is something that Westerners for some reason can't understand. and they can't understand it because it's a cultural thing. And I don't think that they're very culturally aware. And they're being pretty distasteful, in my opinion, when they are trying to blend Santa Muerte and this like very Catholic antagonistic guys, but then they don't understand like the people there are still Catholic. Yeah, she's not a Catholic saint, but they don't understand how Catholicism works south of the border. They don't understand how it works in a colonial context. They know how it works in like an American context or like a Western context. And there are some people, yeah, there are of native practitioners that say like, oh yeah, anybody can come to her. I will. And there are some big names out there, reputable names that say that they have like mentors or something in Mexico. They say, oh yeah, anybody can come to her because death comes for us all kind of thing, right? Those people typically own botanicas. Like they have a spiritual business. And in a place like Mexico, you try to get all the business you can because money, it's a third world country. So yeah, it behooves me to say anybody can work with her. But in actual practice, like I don't believe that it will lend to good results. Like it is such a focus on death that I think it becomes, you hit a point of diminishing returns. There's the robe system, like the colored robe system, but that still is dealing with death as the primary filter. And this is not how ancient Mesoamerica did things. So like for the people that say, oh, like she's not a Catholic saint at all, and I can include her in like kind of a more pagan context. Well, Mesoamerican pagans didn't look at death that way, not the way that Santa Muerte cults do. They worshipped death deities. They did. We have the proof on temple sites. They had ceremonies done in caves, which were the gateways to the underworld. But how did they worship death? They did it seasonally. So there was times where death had to be appeased, where it was typically wintertime. Death would claim the crops. And then springtime would come and the crops would reclaim life and reclaim death. This is a motif that's exhibited in the Popol Vuh. And you see it on ancient vases that have been preserved to this day, where the corn deity is defeating the death deity. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have certain depictions where the death deity is defeating the hero twins and defeating the gods of life or defeating the sun god.
It's like Hades, Persephone.
Exactly, but yeah. What is it doing? It's showing that the pagans of the day were in a holistic balance with those energies. It wasn't just a all round focus on this one specific thing to force unnatural manifestations. Trying to like grow a corn stalk in a bathtub isn't going to work because it's counter to nature. You have to write just because, the weather's not permitting. I want to try and do it with these non-ideal conditions. It's too It's like, there's nothing wrong with some things being artificial, but like it's too artificial to the point of diminishing returns. That's what a lot of Santa Muerte stuff is. And I'm not saying it's not a legit tradition. It is, but it's not as ancient as people want to think. Religion for Breakfast has a good documentation on his YouTube channel about this. It comes from the 1930s. Like there's evidence that it comes from the late 1800s, but it's really coming from the 1930s from a specific family. So the other thing I'll say about Santa Muerte is that in actuality, death is almost like a land spirit in Mexico and in Guatemala and south of the border, whereas because like in places like Ciudad Juarez and in neighborhoods in Monterrey and Acapulco, death has the most power and influence. It's not the spirits of the rain or the wind or anything. It's the most plentiful currency and commerce there is being a hitman or something, or drugs. So you take that and equate that to like being maybe in certain parts of LA. Yeah, that's the truth. There are certain parts of LA where that is like the common currency too. But like
for soccer moms in the suburbs,
exactly,
not the best.
How much? Yeah, exactly. For soccer moms in the suburbs, how much is death ruling your life? How much is death ruling your environment? If you're living in Ciudad Juarez, it does behoove you to make alliances with the spirit of death around there because you want to keep it away and you want to have its favor when the time comes to be defended. But for a lot of crystal mamas and stuff, There's no reason for you to be screwing around with this manifestation of death. I work with death deities, and I don't work with just one. I work with like cosmic horror deities at times. Like, and I mean, I'll take that back a little bit. A lot of these deities, like even biblical angels, can seem like almost cosmic horror, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I kind of mean. But I also do mean like spirits of the actual underworld, of like the actual Maya underworld of Xibalba. I work with deities like that. Deities like Saizen, deities like Chimalkan, or otherwise known as Kamazots. Baluk Chaptan would quantify as that. I work with the dark goddess Ishtar. I work with like a deity. I mentioned he was the deity of like hallucinogenics and alcohol and things like that. He's almost I call him like the Mayan pinhead, like from Hellraiser, because he's the flayed god of like skinning things, and he's like skinned all the time. So like, I work with some pretty edgy spirits, man. But you have to, like, if you are an actual practitioner that is looking for even just good results, we're human. We are human. We're alive. So if you keep death around you, you are like doing the opposite of being human. Like, yeah, death comes for us all within the proper context. You keep it around you too long, you're not actually going by the protocol of the ancients, because the ancients knew better. The ancients knew that death and life and everything in between was seasonal, and you have to cycle off of those things. Like I learned personally I had to, a big rewarding experience was when I was able to surrender to the Maya love goddess. When I couldn't be as Martian and I couldn't be as warlike as I wanted to, I had to let go of my relationship with the war god and allow the love goddess to come in and heal me, because I couldn't be more Martian. Like I couldn't be angry anymore. I wasn't in the army anymore. I wasn't fighting anymore. So I like, where does life go? And she was there to say, like, if you just surrender to love, you win, you get to be happy. That's what those ideas do. And I understand, like, there's people that go to Santa Muerte for love and stuff and the different colored robes. It is still going through that in like the most indirect means possible. It's like, like, why walk barefoot on glass when you can just drive? Kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That is my take on Santa Muerte. If anybody wants to have a discussion and a discourse on it, I'll gladly point out the flaws in that way of thinking. And again, I have tremendous respect for Santa Muerte. Growing up in the Afro-Latino and Caribbean folk magic scene in DC, Santa Muerte was a big deal, and I worked with her. Right? You just have statues of her, and like legitimate statues. Nowadays, they have them all. Again, it's like the Chad treatments to deities, where it's like she looks like she's a Final Fantasy character. Like a real Santa Muerte statue has like these herbs and seeds jam-packed at the bottom. It goes through the doll, and it looks archaic. It doesn't look sleek. That's like actual Santa Muerte practice. I used to do that, but there was a time to move on from that. So like if anybody wants to have an actual discussion about that, I'm like all day, man. So
yeah, that rant was worth the price of admission on its own. That was super interesting. Yeah, thank you for doing that, because I think it's needed.
Yeah, I think it's just like it's kind of like the Cyprian thing. It's the Cyprian thing where it's like people are trying to work with these deities of different cultures, and they're not consulting the culture. There's like people that you can ask. You can't ask Leonidas about the spiritual traditions of Sparta, but you can ask people in local botanicas and people that own these taco shops, but they don't. And I understand. Like when I was in the military, my job was being culturally competent. And that can be a scary thing, to talk to somebody from a different culture that comes from a different world than you and looks really different than you, even in 2024. But sometimes you have to be able to like laugh at yourself and like understand you're not saying everything in Spanish the right way. And if you're going to try and work with these spirits, you have an obligation to try and talk to the people from where it comes from, especially when the people are there. Like they are here. They are in front of us. Like they're not some ancient bygones. Bring it kind of back to a holistic Mesoamerican perspective. The Egyptians are gone. You cannot do ceremonies at the Pyramid of Giza. It's illegal. It's an Islamic republic. Mm-hmm. Egypt's an Islamic republic. But there are ceremonies going on at Maya temples by actual Maya people. And Tikal is like the biggest one. You could do YouTube searches for that one. There's day keepers that do legitimate rituals at Tikal. We have on count 120 to 140 pyramids in Egypt. And that's pretty much all we're going to find. If we find more, it'll be something, but it won't be like a tremendous amount because of how we can survey deserts. But in the Yucatan Peninsula alone, we have 10,000 pyramids. That's not including Salvador and Belize and Guate and Honduras. And there's more being found. We're 10,000 and counting just in Mexico. And that's just Maya. That's not Zapotec. That's not Mixtec. That's not, the remnants of the Mexica and the Aztecs. That's not whatever was left with Teotihuacan. That's not even Olmec. So there are more pyramids in the Americas. Just take Southwest Airlines 3 hours south, and you are in pyramid country more than any place on Earth. This is not my conjecture. This is a fact amongst the archaeological community. There's something to be said about that. Each one of these pyramids in the ancient world took a massive fortune and effort to make, and they were all in search for, yes, divine power, but the divine period. That's a tremendous amount. Like, those numbers don't lie, and those numbers say something. So it's a shame. I was doing an interview last week with a YouTuber occultist, and they asked a good question. And that was like, why isn't this bigger? 10,000 plus pyramids. Why isn't this bigger? 7,000 to 8,000 day keepers, religious authorities. Why isn't this bigger? Why, there's several revival. I listed all 7 components of Mesoamerican magic, right? Why isn't this bigger? When there are revival efforts for other cultures or other like ancient pagan ways that have like much less of anything, like a fraction of everything I've mentioned today, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they have some scripts, some oral traditions, but there's been more revival towards that. Why instead of this? I think it's 2024 and we can have this discussion. I think there's a lot of racial and cultural and linguistic barriers that people just aren't nutting up to. And that is like, if I said Egyptian, people have this fanciful idea clad in gold and pharaoh-like. If I said Mexican, especially with the politics going on now, what do you think? You think wetbacks crossing the border, the guys who make tacos and stuff. Mm-hmm. This guy, like, he does yard work. He's not like descendant from ancient kings that were, while Europe was in the Dark Ages, these people were the wealthiest on earth. Like, you don't think of that. You don't think of like, they had the most cutting edge astronomy and mathematics of anybody in the ancient world. To this day, the mathematics, the calculation of the solar year is actually still up for debate. Who has it? Is it modern atomic clock, or is it the Mesoamerican Hob calendar? We don't know. There is a 0.3 zeros and a 2% difference between the two, and we don't know which one is more accurate.
So I'm going to follow up. I mean, do you want it personally to be bigger? Should it be bigger? It almost seems like that could be a negative. Do you really want the increase in cultural appropriation and festival shamans and that sort of stuff in this space?
So in short, yes, I do want it to be bigger, because when anything gets bigger, it becomes, at some point on the fringes, it becomes a caricature of itself. It's up to the leaders to try and make sure it doesn't become a total caricature of itself. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's like, I'm trying to write these books. I'm trying to become more of a figure out here. I'm kind of going through a period of isolation right now, because honestly, writing is it's an art, mm-hmm. Writing is a vocation, and it's something that I compare myself to the greats in our fields, and I have to produce something of quality of that. And it also, like, we're in the day and age too, where we're definitely past Crowley. We're definitely past a lot of those people that liked to stay enigmatic and shadowy, where like consumers of any medium in any industry now feel more inclined to buy into not just products, but I'm talking ideas from people that they have a sense of familiarity with. That's why you have like YouTube brand boxing. It's like there's professional fighters fighting all the time. Why do these YouTubers get more attention? Well, it's because people know them. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to become more of a visible face and be able to provide proper analysis and protocol for doing such things. I do want it to become bigger. Every big movement is going to become misunderstood at some point. It just does. It just does. Some people out there, some of the greats are overrated because they were just big fishes in small ponds, or it was like the time they were coming up with. And then there are people that don't get the credit that they deserve for one reason or another. So I do want it to become bigger, but I have to provide sources of community discussion, exercises, all for people to actually use and use the right way and make it accessible for people. I am a member right now of the Mind Wisdom Project. I'm not part of their administration team or anything. So like I don't make money off of this whatsoever, but they are legit. If people want to look into that, that is kind of like a good breakthrough into Mayan cosmovision and culture. And there's plenty of non-Maya people that are into that. There's people from all over the world that are a part of that group. But I do participate in that community. That is something that is legit and up right now that people can go to. But there is more to Maya magic than even that. Like if I said Western magic, like how many different people, Balthazar, as we mentioned, has his own approach to it. That's different than Dr. Stephen Skinner's approach, Mm-hmm. So there's so many, and that's the beauty of it. It's fractal. There's so many unique ways to approach it. But there are tasteful ways, and then there are distasteful ways. And I'm here to provide the most tasteful ways.
Cool. Nice answer. I know we're probably going to have to start wrapping up soon. I have a feeling Janus probably has one or two more things, but I just wanted to pick your brain on this. A lot of our listeners are going to be familiar with different forms of esotericism and magic, whether it's from the Golden Dawn or Wicca or theurgic practices or whatever. So what would you be able to give an example of maybe something from your practice, a traditional example of what a working would look like for something fairly common?
So me personally, okay, well, a simple one here's a very simple one, is finding like your Maya day sign or the day sign of the day. And there's Maya calculators online. You can do that. Most of them work pretty much the same. And start venerating the day. So the simplest way to do it is, if you think about it, it's kind of like planetary magic, where we have a day that's ruled by a certain deity or certain energy. That's definitely the case with the day signs, but they're on a rotation of 20, not 7. So just finding out the day sign and just kind of being grateful to the day sign is a basic practice. That's something that I strive to do every day, is to connect with whatever day sign is ruling. And it can just be kind of like an honest dialogue, because and the reason why this doesn't work with everything, right? Because a lot of people are like, what's I don't need all these fancy tools. I can just like leave some incense out for the deity or something like that, or just like have the sigil out. Is that legit? Yeah. But is it equal to an evocation? No. It's like there's just one's got a lot more energy. Now, can you get manifestations just kind of talking to a spirit? Yeah, you can, but it's kind of like rolling the dice. Like it's just like it could just like end up being nothing, or it could end up being like, oh, I won the lottery kind of thing. It's like I've done like prayers to deities, like when I was like in the process of moving. I couldn't have any altars up, and I was looking for a place to live, and I literally just did a prayer out in the grass to the maze god for a place to live that was affordable and nice and secure. This is when I was in the army, and I was looking for a move to a new duty station, and nobody was helping me. The army was not helping me with any kind of living thing, and just Yumka Ash was able to do that. And then I literally found a $20 bill right in front of the place I would live at for the next few years. So sometimes prayer can just work. how you rationalize that is, well, so, and why it can work, why I think it can work. Why I know it can work with day signs is because essentially how approximate they are to us. The day signs literally rule this 24-hour period, so it can hear you. If you're like really trying to talk to it, it can hear you. Because tomorrow it won't rule, but today it will. I'm not saying this works for Western magic though. Okay, so don't like today's Mercury or today. Yeah, don't go trying to like apply this to Western magic because I don't necessarily know if it would work. But with the Maya day signs, you can have some kind of connection to it. Now, will it lead to a full-on like blast manifestation for like something big? More than likely not. I think it does require a little bit more of a punch. But I got a pretty big manifestation praying to that god. And now the god is different from a day sign. Why? So why did it work? Well, he's the god of the earth, and he's a very approachable deity. Like he's known for being very responsive. Like there's a part of the folklore that says he can appear, verbatim, he can appear in an instant, like out of nowhere. So what does that mean? It means he's spiritually very approximate to us, which that's better to me than a physical manifestation of like, something spooky and folkloric. Mm-hmm. Oh, like, you better watch out because he appear. No, that's great. That's a great sign because that means like I can talk to him. Like he's there. That's what that folklore actually means in practice, right? Why, though, too, he's like one of these gods that represents like a macrocosmic force. Like Janus, I think we were talking about like one time we were talking about like end cosmic and hypercosmic. Whatever the higher version of those two, I forget the order. Those are like the gods. Like when we think Maya deity worship, I call it the god spectrum. And in Maya, you would say Yum Si Lob. It's kind of like the plurality of the divine, the plurality of God. Think your Platonic concepts, your Gnostic pleroma, those. So like, why would that work? Yeah, they're very, very far from us, but they're so fundamental that they're kind of there. Like, you can find it in everything. And also we're made of corn. So why wouldn't the god of corn kind of listen to us? So there's kind of like that. And I'll say like just becoming aware of these things on a cosmological scale, cosmovision scale, makes you more in tune to where you can receive more benefits from these things with less tools. But to answer your question, it's in my kind of practice, it's like that. I could run you through a whole ritual practice, but then like that's like a whole seminar. But it's based off of, again, relating to Chilam Bilama I mentioned earlier. There's a core incantation. There is a core series of 4 chants, and the reason why there's 4 chants is because there's 4 directions. And I have a set of ritual tools. My preferred ritual tools are going to be an obsidian knife, a jade pendant, a series of glyphs. Like a series of glyphs that either relate to the intention or relate to the deity. I can bypass that typically because I use a bunch of like, you can probably see them on my camera in the corners. They're like giant Mesoamerican wooden masks that come from like Yucatan and Guatemala and Belize. So I have like these highly charged effigies of the deity. So I use that as the central piece, and I will have a seashell. The seashell is pretty esoteric. For running out of time, I won't talk about it. But like it's a big thing in Maya mathematics and Maya cosmovision of why a seashell. But yes, to answer your question, that's what a ritual, at least the basic components, consist of.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Janus, what do you got?
So I do want, you did some elaboration of the time spirit thing, the day keepers. That is something that I did want to touch on a little bit more because people are not going to be familiar with that. It does seem like there is a parallel. The Egyptians did have the system of the decanic spirits, which sounds very similar. I wouldn't say identical, but similar, because the decanic spirits do rule every single day of the year. And I think that it's really interesting that these cultures, which in some way have parallels, even metaphysically, had I think a similar, in some way, orientation towards the world. But I also wanted to talk about the relationship with the dead and the cult of the dead, and how that plays out.
Yeah, what exactly about?
The cult of the dead in your practice, also the relationship, like the relationship towards the dead, and also concurrently towards with the underworld as well. As because different cultures, like if you look at First Nations cultures in North America, some actually were not at all, down with interacting with the deceased. So it's not like, and especially today, it's funny because I was taught ancestral veneration a couple decades ago when I was initiated into a practice, but back then it wasn't some big popular thing. Now you have these facile, limp-wristed neo-pagans appropriating the idea of ancestral practice without even really understanding what that entails and the responsibility involved with involvement with the deceased. And, I'm just wondering, that's me being a little vitriolic, I understand that, but I'm just wondering, like, what's the attitude towards in the relationship with the deceased in your practice and in the Maya worldview and cosmology?
Okay, yeah. So, like the dead is a part of my practice for sure. So it's like when you have all these edgelords or like these people that want to make Santa Muerte cuddly, there's plenty of that I've got to go around. So it's not that I am adverse to death, and I can respect to the traditions that are, because you have various traditions that prioritize different things. Even in the East, some of them, they reject the notion of personified deities, or like they know they exist, but they want nothing to do with them, and they're trying to focus on this. I guess you would say, for lack of a better word, like an inward turn. I think that's kind of to say that this practice doesn't have an inward turn is kind of ridiculous too, because you practice it enough, the gods have you looking inside, because like it just gets meta. My relationship with the dead. So like what's big and catchy and trendy is that I think Western culture is looking at like Dia de los Muertos and seeing like, wow, Latin America has such a fun way to look at existing alongside the dead. And it is like, it's just a different, and that's a pre-Columbian thing too. This is not just like a colonial era mishmash. The attitude towards the dead was that they were very close. As I mentioned, they buried family members underneath the homes in classic Maya cities. So like you almost had like an acropolis coexisting beneath the city. So it's seen, death is kind of like a part of life, but it's also a exalted position. And I'm saying this I'm trying to say this carefully because I don't want people to be like all edgelordy about it and just start focusing on it. Death in the time worship as the death sign Kame or Kimi is like the luckiest sign that you can have, because it's multifaceted. You don't just look at it as like dead. You look at it as like, it's the sign that all of the ancient kings and queens are associated with. This honored dead, this like, you will live after this life. That's what it means, is a life after this life. Those who don't initiate or aren't royal or like just didn't have a close connection with the divine will not have a life after this life, or like at least they will have such a lack of self-determination that they are essentially in somewhat kind of like dependent or subservient to something else. Whereas like if you initiate and you practice, you will have some kind of recollection of self and exaltation of self in the ancestral plane. So that's a component of death to make note of. I think that's a highly advanced one, granted our like current landscape of understanding the dead in Western culture, especially like any kind of spiritual culture. A lot of people don't think of it like that. People are like, what can I use the dead for? And there is definitely that. Like, this isn't inherently Maya, but Anima Sola is big in folk magic and Latino folk magic. And while Anima Sola is like this, essentially like a go-to and tranquil spirit that is a bit more colonial in origin, Intranquil spirits have always been a part of like indigenous witchcraft. And you do have that, like binding like a dead person's spirit and whatnot. I'll tell you right now, in my opinion, and I'm an explorer of all kinds of magic. I got respect for all kinds of magic. I'm not saying that is never not an option, but it is a seriously, like, it's not for beginners. That's really not for, it's not even for most advanced practitioners, because I've seen it with brujos and babalaos and santeros and like people that cross, again, those aren't Maya, but again, like a lot of them cross paths and they end up doing similar things and they end up like sometimes like hanging out together. A lot of people got screwed up trying to deal with like intranquil spirits and whatnot. So there's that kind of like necromancy and working with the dead. But like Dia de los Muertos is a time to, and again, like there's a bit of colonization that's mixed with Dia de los Muertos because it was a thing pre-colonial and pre-Columbian, but actually the time frame of which it took place was actually in September, not in like October to November time. That is part of the Catholic influence, is the shifting to like the to match Samhain kind of thing. But what it allows us to like have a relationship with those who've passed on from us. That's a bit more like grandma magic, like when you think of like conventional ancestral magic. So it's like, do I celebrate that time of year? I will say, actually, it's like, yeah, I do maintain that in the more, I guess, in the more folk magic Catholic sense and the syncretized Catholic sense, because it's easier to do calendrically. You know, it's like everybody is festive for those reasons at that time. I haven't prioritized doing it at the end of September because just, you know, I've got a lot of things to do and the world's moving. So I got to do things. I have to set my priorities. But it was pre-Columbian time around like the end of September time rather than what we're used to. But how I personally work with the dead primarily is like I work with intermediary kings, like King Kinichana Pakal. I have other ancestors I work with too that come from that bruja lineage, but I'm particularly partial to working with the royal dead, the ancestral royalty, like as the ones that reached apotheosis and still resemble and have some resemblance of self, because we're human once, so they have a lot of influence here. They can enter our reality better. And if they're a royal, even more the better. The other thing is that I do work with the god of death, Saizen, and yes, I am saying his name incorrectly because to say his name correctly is to conjure death. So by his instruction, in my practice, I don't say his name correctly, at least out loud, unless I'm in ritual. So I take him very seriously, and he is the one that he's like, if you Google Maya death god, you'll probably see him. He's also known as Apuch or Apuach or Yum Simil. And I've worked with him to, like, especially when I was not having, when people were out to get me, essentially, in certain professional ventures, I would work with him. And he doesn't just, like, kill people. Like, he can help you, like, deceive people and be tricky and stuff like that. He can help embarrass your enemies and stuff like that rather than kill them. That's very much in line with the mythology, because if you read the Popol Vuh and the Journey to the Underworld, like it's seriously like who can prank each other to death. Like that's really how they kill you. It's like it's the series of pranks, and if you fall for a succession of pranks, then you ritually get sacrificed. But you have to fall for the pranks first. So there's an element of humor with death in Mesoamerican and Latin American culture. It's just like built in. It's a cultural difference. Like even Apuch means the stinking one, because like he's associated with like defecation and farting. So like there's a bit of you can take that seriously too, but there's a bit of like tongue in cheek and laughing. I work with other like dark entities too, like Chimalcan, otherwise known as Kamazots. The thing is that a lot of people don't know this too, is that Kamazots, they want to say, was the god of bats. Camazotz is like a race of spirits of bat demons, and Chimalcan is actually like the god of them. But Chimalcan, while this like nightmarish, like very like murderous kind of spirit, was also a protector spirit to the Cachiquel Maya. This is in the Popol Vuh too. He was actually kind of weird because he almost exhibited like a Prometheus styled role, whereas where other Maya peoples were sacrificing humans in exchange for divine fire, Chimalcan stole fire from the deities and gave it to the Cachiquels.
Fascinating.
And it actually caused rivalries between the Quiche and the Cachiquels because the Cachiquels didn't sacrifice for their fire. Their god just stole it. But it said that their god came from the underworld. He was a Xibalban. So, and that was Chimalcan. So I work with Chimalcan too. And really, like, if you trace the heritage-wise, that's my mother is of Cachiquel origin. So it's very much in line for me to work with the deity of the Cachiquels, which was Chimalcan.
Fascinating. Now, Chimalcan, he sounds like he's not, I can see why people might be scared of him, but I see a strain of benevolence in that god.
Yeah, you grant the protection aspect and grant the what was it? The actual stealing fire from the gods and giving it to people. There you go. You got a protective deity. Whereas, like, if you read just the underworld tale of the Popol Vuh, Camazotz snatches the head of Hunahpu, and he's like very much just like Martian surgical head removal kind of spirit, decapitating spirit. So some of the like dark deities, like very dark deities, right? Like even Ishtab, the goddess, she's called the goddess of suicide by Catholic authorities. That's not exactly true. That's not exactly false, but it's not exactly the whole story. She's really the goddess of the eclipsed moon. And I have done a lot of rituals with her. I've done group rituals with her, and can tell you as best of a guarantee as we can get with all of these like weird mystic, like not very objective fields, that she's much more than just like a plaguing spirit and a like something that gets you, like a horror movie spirit. You know what I'm saying? She's not that. She's a macrocosmic entity that stands for the moon and all essence of the moon and femininity when it is eclipsed and shrouded in darkness. But yes, I work with very like dark entities. And that being said, there are entities in Maya cosmology that you do not mess with under any circumstance. And you like, human beings were never meant to intermix with them. Like, you can eat celery, you can eat beef, you can eat octopus, and you can eat sea urchin. Very different foods from each other, right? But you can't eat crude oil, can you? So not everything in nature was meant to be fucked with. And there are certain things, and I'm sorry I dropped the F-bomb, but there are certain things in every cosmology that you don't mess with. Because if you do, then yeah, okay, then things are going to happen. And I know this from personal experience too. I have not been the most sensible and smartest practitioner. I've made mistakes, but there are certain entities that you never mess with. And this goes across all traditions. For some reason, there's like, in this attempt to reclaim paganism and esotericism, we've done this pendulum swing and yo-yo effect of like, everything that Catholicism and Christianity taught us was wrong. And actually the bad guys are the good guys, or everybody's good. And that's not the case. Mm-hmm. That is not the case. There are various types of entities, not just one type. There's not just one bad guy that you never mess with. I've mentioned one of them here, which is the Kashlan, but there's also specific time demons that you don't mess with in the Maya cosmology. There are certain chaos entities that come before creation that are still active in certain, like, I guess, like conceptual capacities, but unless you summon them into personification or give them some sort of personage, they kind of stay at a distance. But if you're stupid enough, as I was at one time, to kind of grant them an audience you start getting into like some Lovecraft effect, or
there are a lot of people out there, it seems, that feel like they are untouchable when it comes to the danger involved with stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just a huge ego or what it is, but
I think it's Western entitlement. I think a lot of it's Western entitlement, and they're like, "I'm special. I can do this." It's like, no, there's just something, and this is not like. Let's remove this from like other things too, like some other things that don't have Christian influence. I know in various forms of Buddhism there are just like demons that like. There are like binding of demons, right? There's binding of demons in Tibetan Buddhism. In West African traditions, there are like these orishas that they embody both light and dark, right? Like even as far as like death and hurricane destruction and like war and stuff like that. Okay, but in those same like orisha traditions, you have a race of spirits called the Osongbo, which the orishas, even the orisha of death, runs from, like, and hides from, and that you have that in Mesoamerica too. So this is not like Catholic propaganda or Christian propaganda. Just like people haven't done the research, and they want magic done with microwave results. They want it done quick, and they're like, well, if I go to these dark entities, maybe they'll break the rules for me, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. What they don't realize is these dark beings are standing on business.
Say again.
I said, what they don't realize is these dark beings are standing on business.
Yeah, they don't get it. And again, I mentioned a bunch of deities, like even Saizen, who is like the principal god of death, who is like an antagonist in the Popol Vuh, but is a very nuanced antagonist. That is not the same as other entities that are named in the Popol Vuh that should probably never be worked with, that are antagonistic to the gods. Well,
and not to interrupt you, because I feel like I want to just get you drunk and hang out with you all day at a barbecue and listen to you talk, because I love everything you're saying. But I want to leave at least a little time to talk about the intriguing element of shape-shifting, which is something Dom and I have had a great passion for since we were young. And I've always been deeply interested in the Jaguar cult, among not only the Maya, but the Olmec. Because you have these giant heads and these sculptures sometimes these sculptures that depict people in the process of transformation into a jaguar. And so it's clearly a very important part of that spiritual shamanic tradition. I was wondering if you could speak on that.
Yeah, there are certain ways to activate such, to ritualize it, to not just kind of, I think people kind of just like, raw dog it and cold turkey it. What I've seen, at least in like shamanic attempts to, and again, shape shifting should be taken with a proper asterisk, where I think there's definitely degrees of shape shifting. And I've cross-referenced this when I was a member of the White Buffalo Society, that was like, I think, Plains Indians, Northern Native American. I've compared notes with them, essentially. There are certain things happen at certain like magnitudes and whatnot, and like a full like shape shifting thing is like, it's rare. There are a lot of testimonies. I've had a lot of weird experiences where I've seen, like medicine women, essentially there 1 second, look back and it's a crow and the woman's gone, kind of thing. But shape shifting, there are actual ritual processes for it. There are actual ritual symbols used. There are ritual substances too, but that's not really as important as kind of like ritualized music and creating trance state while attempting to shapeshift. And shapeshifting should also be considered like shapeshifting equals connection to animal spirit, or connection to that. Yeah, let's just say animal spirit for now, for the sake of examples. Jaguars in particular, but it wasn't just jaguars. There was a lot in Olmec influence too, with sharks, and there's surviving jade statues of were ducks, like people transforming into ducks, and it looks comical. I've shown Elizabeth some of these depictions, and they look funky. but ducks were a big one. The legend of Tecunuman, who is one of the last Maya military leaders that fell to Pedro de Alvarado in Guatemala. His nahual was the quetzal bird. That's where the quetzales, like the Guatemalan dollar, comes from, the national bird, which is the quetzal, and it's the national bird because Tecunuman would shapeshift into a quetzal. It was said that when Pedro de Alvarado stabbed him, that when his body fell, on the horizon arose a quetzal from the place where his body dropped. So you have shapeshifting in many different capacities, not just jaguars, but jaguars definitely like the signature move. Believe it or not, there was werewolves too in Mesoamerica, primarily in Oaxaca, in southwest Mexico, but also in it's an anomaly. But in the city of, I believe it's El Baúl. It's either El Baúl or Izapa. In western Guatemala, you find jaguar men and you will find wolf men too. So there was people that were transforming into wolves and there were people that were transforming into jaguars. And this obviously extends out from Olmec times. And that's kind of a historical note that should be mentioned. There were so people think Olmec then Maya. Depends on what you're talking about. So that was definitely the case in like western Guatemala. But if you go to the Petén region of where like El Mirador is today, what's being excavated now is that there were Maya communities at that time that developed completely separate from the Olmec. So you have Maya that are like pure Maya and then Maya that came out of Olmec. But the were-jaguar, archaeologists like to say that especially the depiction of babies transforming into jaguars or mid-transformation is to allegorically say that shamanism is a thing you're born with. And if you're, it's like you either have it or you don't kind of thing. But it's not just babies transforming into jaguars in Mesoamerica. There's a famous stone carving it's called the Jaguar Man. Looks super cool. And the thing is, I guess to bring it round to the question, can you do it? And like what would you do it for? So I do it. I use a specific tool, which is a were-jaguar necklace carved out of jade. That costs a pretty penny. But why do I use it? I didn't just pull it out of thin air. If you look at the carvings of like the were-jaguars, there's one called the Kuntz axe. It's an Olmec one, but it's a gigantic like effigy of this jaguar baby and this were-jaguar that was treated as a god. And it's huge. It's a giant piece of single jade. Probably would cost like millions of dollars in modern jadeite. So they carved ritual tools out of jadeite. That is one of the tools that I employ when I'm trying to reach out to the spirit of the jaguar. Now, you can if I can get inside baseball with the intention of such a thing, right? Like, why would you do it when you could just? I guess sometimes it could just be preference. Like some people relate to animal spirits more than they do gods. I talk to some practitioners and like they're not interested in talking to gods at all. They just want to do like mediumship, or they don't want to work with that, but they want to work with animals, or they want to work with plants. Maybe it is just a preference thing. You just have to know that you have to know the animals' correspondences. And I will say though that I think there is a learning curve to it. I think there is a much steeper learning curve to shamanic, like shape-shifting and bonding with animal spirits than someone would think. I find it so much easier to work with gods. Now that might just be a me thing, because I notice like across my entire like occult history, I've been able to do that easier more than any other kind of magic, like working with like major entities. So it might just be a me thing, but I have found that there is much more of a learning curve because if you think about it, a single jaguar spirit is a much more like, it's almost like, okay, you're dealing with an ethereal version of a jaguar. If you try to deal with a material version of a jaguar, like how civilized is that conversation? You know, it's like, it is almost alien. It's pretty alien. So there's a learning curve to it. I think, and this kind of ties it back to the God conversation, but here might be a better way, a more accessible way of entering with it. If you try to go to the God of jaguars, as in like the jaguar consciousness, like the apex idea of a jaguar. I know Ivo Dominguez talks about this in his book, Spirit Speak, where he's talking about animal spirits and they have their own deities, essentially, or their own perfected ideas of those. And I think certain gods can help you connect to certain animals more, because there is the deer god, the actual deer god, Hu'uksi'ip, or Awinkir Masa, which is the deer deity that can help you have a connection with deer. And I have that's another big shape-shifting one. And I have a very, very good relationship with the deer spirit, because we have a lot of deer here in our local park that you can come like almost nose to nose with. So it's a very good way to like exercise having a spirit to animal to human relationship. But I think that's probably where I would recommend most people is to start with the idea, like that platonic embodiment of a jaguar or something, if they wanted to use it. Because like you think, so the jaguars are the apex feline of the New World, a lot of solar correspondences. Because even Kenichi Hao, his night aspect was called the jaguar god of the underworld. That's because archaeologists, they haven't really deciphered the whole name of the JGU, is what they abbreviated it as. But the jaguar god of the underworld was to the sun god when he is in the underworld, the night sun, and he's illuminating Xibalba. So if you wanted to connect with the various types of jaguars too, because there's all black jaguars, there's spotted jaguars, there's red jaguars, believe it or not. The various types of jaguar spirits probably all have some kind of solar correspondent and an underworld correspondent. Jaguars are actually pretty versatile. Whereas like something like an owl is exclusive to the underworld. And really, you should be cautious with that one too. Like, you shouldn't call on an owl spirit unless, I mean, if you got a lot of owls around you, sure. Like, you know, make a like some kind of kosher alliance with those spirits. But like in Native American folklore and Mesoamerican folklore, when you see an owl, it typically means somebody's going to die. That's why it's like, if you ask me, I always bring this up because I'm very passionate about this. If you ask a Native American or a Mesoamerican, or like somebody like physician, what Mothman wasn't a Mothman, that was an owl man, and that was a messenger from Xibalba, because what Mothman predicted was a fortune of doom, and that's literally what happened. So, because that's what happens in the Popol Vuh too. The owls are the messengers of the lords of Xibalba. So some of them are depicted with owls on top of their head, like on hats. Did that answer the shape-shifting question, or did you want more?
That was great, yeah. And I mean, we could go on probably for hours more, but what I want to do now is just talk about where people can find you. You know, what services do you offer? What do you do? Where will people be? You know, where can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about these things and perhaps, you know, reach out to you personally?
So right now, I just like have my Facebook page. That's it. Right now, at this moment, I am not offering services. Right now, I just had a whole parade of clients, and I just I had to like put it on pause because I'm currently trying to set up my website. I'll set up my website and I'll be offering services through there. I'll be offering like blog posts and other things. I plan on starting a YouTube channel. I do a lot of presentations at several conferences. I will put up my website. I'm working on it right now, so it's probably going to be until 2025 though, when I launch my website and I'll offer services. I'll be doing, I know I'm committed to a actually a few panels at Sacred Space Conference in Baltimore, Maryland. in March of 2025, at the end of March. So look that up. And it's a great conference. Like anybody who wanted to come out to it, it would be well worth it. And I also recommend, like, even if you're not anywhere close to Maryland, coming out to that one, because that epicenter of Afro-Latino folk magic I told you about is like within driving distance of where the convention happens. And people should go and have a cultural experience, a magical cultural experience in like Langley Park, Maryland, and Wheaton, Maryland. And like they're all a part of the DMV area. And it would be a very enlightening experience and educational experience for most people of any background. I will, so like when I do offer services, just a note about services, I offer them in like a package kind of format. I found that that is what works the best, because I think the days of like doing one-off spells for some people and then just kind of leaving them to the wind, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and clients typically come back. They either come back satisfied or they come back highly unsatisfied because they're kind of left on a cliffhanger. And it's like, unless they get a very big manifestation that like even would prove skeptics wrong, they're kind of going to be like, you left me with nothing. So I do them in like a package format. And so it, like when I do open up my services again, just know that you're in for a little bit of work. I'm trying to talk about the truth of metaphysics here. It is not Hollywood. It is not just like I'm going to light some candles and poof a cigar on something, and then you get your girlfriend back or something like. Then you don't have to do any like work or anything. I don't like doing magic like that, because that's their life. Those people's lives are not very enchantable. I know Jason Miller talked about making an enchanted life, and other people talked about having an enchantable life. If I have like somebody that just wanted a one-off spell, and I've got to petition the goddess of love, and then these people are like never going to consider like metaphysical forces in their lives again. Or
leaving the house.
Or leaving their house, and they have no reverence for the divine. I don't want to work with people like that. I want to work with people that want to have like relationships with the divine, but also like change their lives and change the world, because this stuff does work. Like I don't have to work a normal job all because of magic working. I don't have to worry about health insurance because my magic works. I don't have to worry about love because my magic works. You know, like it's, you know, you get good enough at these things. And I'm about teaching people how to do it. And that doesn't take away, like a lot of people, like it's an old fashioned way of thinking that you teach people how to do this and they're never going to come back to you. I pride myself on being a good teacher. I've taught in various athletic capacities. I've always been a good coach. I've led soldiers. I consider myself a professional teacher without ever like being an actual like teacher. So I know that I can instruct people at high levels for high level success with these kinds of things, or with these kinds of very unseen and soft sciences. So when I launch my platform in 2025, that'll be it. I'll just say, like, if you want to keep up with my work, I know it's not the most professional thing right now. Just send me a request on Facebook and I'll post about it. I'm in the middle of writing, again, 7 volumes of Mesoamerican magic. So I'm very busy right now. I'm also writing, I'm in the process of writing metafictional stuff. Essentially like, think like fiction based off of Mesoamerican mythology rather than like the various fictions based off of like Percy Jackson and, you know, Arthurian mythos. So that takes time. So, be on the lookout for that. Just a note on that. That's another tip that I guess people can take, like read good fiction. There like, especially in the last, like in the last 20-ish years, there's been an effort with esotericism to put out fancy books, and some of them I've been a big fan of. And then some of it are like literally just dribblings. Like there's just like people's muses on like the darkness and stuff that leads to absolutely nothing. It's not actionable, and it's so cryptic it might as well not mean anything. You can, out of like more like philosophical or musing type stuff, you're better off reading good authors that have like that have like shamanic, occult, and Gnostic influences, like a Cormac McCarthy or Ursula K. Le Guin or Clive Barker is my personal favorite. Grant Morrison is an actual magician and he writes comics. Alan Moore was an actual magician and wrote comics. Neil Gaiman's another one. Like, read some of those. And while they're not, I'm not saying go to those to learn spells. No, I'm saying go there to essentially expand your comprehension. Like, it helps you to get better at your own sports, essentially. Like, there's this thing, like when I would work with other athletes. Oh, here's a good one. Like George St. Pierre. George St. Pierre was stalling out in his MMA training, so he took up gymnastics training. And he felt that it helped him essentially work out new neural pathways that helped him understand mixed martial arts better because it was body mechanics. So, like these more musing and philosophical texts, not the classics. Obviously, the classics are great, right? But if you're looking for more modern musings and philosophical texts, you're better off going with a esoteric, a fictional author who is inspired by esotericism, rather than like the actual musings of like these hardbacks that cost like $600, and it's like triple spaced, indexed words and paragraphs that may amount to 50 pages, but they stretch it out to 200, and they're not really getting at anything.
Awesome, man. Well, we appreciate your time. I definitely learned a ton. I was not aware of a lot of this practice, so I appreciate it. I'm going to guess that our audience was not familiar with a lot of this as well, and so this has been great. Thanks again.
Yeah, it was just wonderful having you on. It's really inspiring to see how passionate you are about this, and you've obviously devoted years and years of intensive study, blood, sweat, and tears. There's no question about it. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, I know what that's like, and I really appreciate that dedication and that focus. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing the fruits of your dedication and your investment, because it's very beautiful to see somebody who cares so deeply about these things.
Well, I thank you. Yes, it is my vocation to do this. Like, I've devoted my life to this, and it's what I'm passionate about. Like, it really is a whole world of magic that people don't know exists. Or if they're aware of that there was an ancient civilization there, they have no idea how expansive the mythology is. Like, because of like academic barriers, the academic documents, sometimes they're hard to get and they're trite. Cultural, language barriers, colonial barriers over time. All of that has helped put up this veil that we don't see much expansion behind really folk magic culture leading into like an ancient Mesoamerican culture, right? The magic of Latin America. We don't look at it to be as expansive as, the Sephiroth or the various Vedic traditions, or the various energetic traditions of the Far East. We don't look at it like that, but it really is. We went through those 7 main categories, but there's energy work in Mesoamerica. There's shape-shifting. There's deific evocation. There's working with the royal dead. There's trapping spirits. Like, I've seen jars where they used to trap these very bad spirits, like the spirits that you don't really work with, but there are spirits that you bind if they are plaguing you. In the caves in Belize, there are these jars that the ancient Maya would capture the spirits, and they would offer those bad spirits to the death gods to destroy. So, I like that, when you think about that, like, oh, that sounds a lot, or at least in part, like brass vessel stuff, like goetic stuff. It's, the vast expanse of the sacred Saba tree and the cosmology, the 13 realms of the Maya heavens, the 7 realms of the Maya earth, the 9 levels of the underworld, the outer chaos. These are all things that the ancestral dimension of Pashil. These are things I didn't get to touch on, but like, you see how expansive this is. The star folds that correspond to the planets. People don't know about them. Rominko Canal, Sahal Canal. These are the Maya names for Jupiter and Mars, respectively.
Well, hurry up and write those books, dude.
Yeah, I'm trying.
You've hooked me in.
Yeah, I'm gonna put some more oil on the engine.